Hi, my name is Phyllis Byars. I'm an American who's been living and working in South Africa for the last 20 years. In the wake of the George Floyd murder and the protests that have rippled across the globe, I've been asked to answer three questions about systemic racism. So here are my answers. So the first question is, what has this moment meant for you? And what is particular about this moment, June 2020, is that there are so many people around the world who are now willing to have a conversation about systemic racism, which of course is a very difficult conversation to have and very uncomfortable. And people have now said that I'm not going to sit down. I'm not going to say, sorry that happened. It's uncomfortable and difficult, but there's nothing I can do about it. And whether that's because the video that we watched was incredibly violent, that someone had to commit for 8 minutes and 46 seconds to strangling the life out of someone, or whether it's because we're in the midst of the COVID response and most of us are at home and have time to watch videos and watch response to what's happened and watch the protests grow, or whether it's because we have seen the number of other people that have stood out against this and the number of corporations who have finally spoken out, that we now have a stronger desire to understand what's happening. Whatever the reason, there are so many more people that are willing to have an honest conversation, willing to make themselves vulnerable to really understand what's been happening. The second question was, what can allies do? And I'm going to start my answer to that question by saying that when it comes to systemic racism, I do not believe that allyship is the right approach. I don't think that it's relevant to the conversation. Because in my view, systemic racism is dangerous. It destroys the humanity of people who execute it, from people who benefit from it, whether passively or actively, and people, of course, who are the victims of it. It rips all of us robs all of us of our humanity. You just can't be a full, functioning, healthy human when you are comfortable with that happening on your behalf, to you, or acting that out. And so when we talk about addressing it, in my mind, it is about showing up in the fullness of your own humanity. It is about understanding where it comes from, what it's meant to do, how you have participated or benefited from it, again, actively or passively. And then it's about what you can do in your own circles, and in some cases beyond, to make sure that that's not a part of your lived experience and that you are not robbed of your humanity because systemic racism is operating around or in you. The third question was, what can we do to support people? And I guess this goes back to that concept of allyship, or showing up for people, let me put it that way. And I think the first thing that we have to do, all of us, is to take a very deep personal look at how we are all involved in it. And when we look at human history, we know that systemic racism has been a part of the way we've operated as humans for centuries. It has been documented, it has been written into our sciences, our methodologies, into our social and political structures, in so many ways that if you start looking, it starts popping up in a lot of places. And when you start to really become aware of it, to see how deeply ingrained it is, so that because it is now systemic, we don't have to individually take it up and run with it, right? We are sometimes just by not actively working against it, you're actually participating in it. So I think the first thing to do, the first action, is to understand how you're participating. And the question is not if, the question is how. Me as a black person, I as a black person am participating in it. There's some concepts that sit in my head that are racist that I have to address. I have to constantly check myself on. So those would be my recommendations. If you are interested, it is Robin DiAngelo, and you can look up, just put in Seattle. She did a wonderful talk at a university in Seattle. It's about an hour and 30 minutes. Wonderful discussion point there. Then I think white people should be having conversations with other white people once you start to unpack whiteness and what it means and systems of racism, then I think it's important to have conversations with other white people around what that means and what can be done. And then to look at some of the public policy changes that are being requested in the states. I mentioned the defunding the police and what that means, looking at the city's engagement with citizens, and are they actually assuming that they are criminals and so then just assigning police to them, or are they saying, okay, these are full humans and what do we do as a city to support their development and make them self-sufficient? And then if you are not in the States and you are looking in your own communities, I would say spend some time to understand your city or maybe your country's relationship to race relations in general. In Europe, it's obviously the obvious connection is slave trade, which many countries were a part of or affected by. Also look at migration patterns in the last kind of 100 to 50 to 100 years. And then what have people from different races who have mixed in and have come in and become part of the country, what have their experiences been like? There might be an opportunity to have specific conversations around that. And then what are some of the challenges that are being faced by people of different races in your community, and how can you understand those better so that you can work from a base of knowledge and a place of compassion and understanding. So I'm very, very, very encouraged by the fact that so many people are wanting to have these conversations, that so many people are being vulnerable to open up, to ask questions, to listen, earnestly listen to what other people are experiencing and not just dismiss it and say, oh, probably not as bad as you think, but to listen and understand what other humans are going through. And then as humanity, as this collective family, trying to do better for ourselves so that the next generation will not suffer at the same level that we have here. And that means for everybody. Again, when you address systemic racism, everyone's humanity is, their capacity to their humanity is increased. We experience it on a greater level, and we're robbed of it when systemic racism is allowed to run rampant.